What's up, Rockstars? If you've ever thought of 3D printing, I encourage you to watch this first. I have some tips that you don't typically find or you infer later on. I'm going to spell it out for you right now. Before diving into that, a quick shout out to my sponsor, GameWorkCreate. They are a fantastic service when it comes to getting 3D printed physical models to your doorstep. They do amazing work. Even if you have a smaller 3D printer, let's say a resin printer, and you want a big amount of terrain for like a game of Warhammer or your favorite board game or something like that, they can do that. There's a link down in the description below for them. Here's an example, by the way. This is one they sent me a while back, but amazing job at both printing it, obviously. There's 0 layer lines on there, but also of assembling it and then sending it in a safe package. So highly recommend them for anything big or small. Even if you just want your favorite character or a cool mini that you saw for your D&D campaign, and they can hook you up. Again, that is linked down in the description below. GameWorkCreate does a great job. Highly recommend it. With that, let's go ahead and dive in. Now, this is something that I have now learned after getting a 3D printer and after printing. And a lot of this is based off mistakes I have made or conclusions I've come from many failures to get you on the right track from the get-go. So let's go ahead and dive right in. The first thing is definitely just the knowledge that yesterday's tech is not bad tech. Everybody wants the latest and greatest thing. Oh, look at this. This is an 8K printer, and this is a different kind of way to illuminate the screen, and this uses this technology to print faster from the spool, and all this other kind of stuff is great and wonderful. And if you want to get the latest model, you always can. But don't be afraid to actually save some money and buy yesterday's model. Last year's model was fantastic up until they announced the new one, right? It actually has always been fantastic and always will be fantastic. There's nothing wrong with getting the tier below. So if the Mars 3 from Elegoo is out, you can get a Mars 2. It's fantastic. The only thing I would say is there are some tech that you really want to pay attention to. For instance, for resin, you definitely want a mono screen. It just lasts so much longer. So, do your research, but for the most part, feel free to save some money, especially first diving in and get an older model. Now, the second thing I want to point out is that regardless of if it's FDM or resin, use the correct material you're going to be printing in. For instance, with resin, they come in a wide variety of things, and you can get it from super hard, almost ceramic plastic or resin, or you can get it really bendy. So if you're making a game piece for your D&D session that you're going to be moving around, might drop off a table, stuff like that, definitely get the bendier version. Otherwise, if you're just painting up something like this, it doesn't have to be. It can be quite firm. You'll get that extra little bit of detail out of it, and it's just a display piece either to print off or to show. Just pick the appropriate one, and just know that your printer can most likely handle them all. Even if it's an FDM printer, if you need to go swap to ABS or something like that, you certainly can. Just make sure to ventilate and stuff, but if that's what you need, you can certainly do it. So really what I'm saying is the printer doesn't actually matter so much there. It's what you fill that printer with. What material are you printing? And by and large, your printer can support any of those options. All right, now this is big. Now, while the type of material you're using doesn't necessarily drive the printer you do, as long as you decide FDM or resin, however, pick a company that's well established, that's very popular. I understand that there are a lot of other companies, and I'm all for supporting small, more indie efforts. But not for your first printer. For your first printer, you're going to want to get something like Elegoo or Creality or Anycubic or any of these very popular companies that a ton of people, that millions of customers have also bought from, because there's a huge amount of advantage there. Far more support, better documentation, far more support from the user base, other people. If you have an issue with your Elegoo, with your Anycubic, or with your Creality, or whatever, you can find somebody that has the exact same printer that is more than happy to share their settings with you, or do some recommended upgrades or something like that. All of that is there. Updated firmwares more often. It's much better to get into one of these ecosystems. Now, once you get over that hump, right? Once you kind of really know what you're doing, by all means venture out and do something cool and amazing. But for a first back, I would definitely only buy something from one of these big name companies. The support level, especially when it comes to like settings and stuff like that and recommendations, are just, you can't beat it. Often when you get an STL to print, it'll come with recommended settings for your printer, but they don't do every single company out there, just the big ones. So you can actually get recommended settings for the exact print you're doing even often. often with these. So definitely stick to the name brand in this instance. Okay, now this actually doesn't matter which one you're doing. If it's FDM or resin, by all means, add more supports than you think. The supports definitely are more resin, but you can do them in FDM. And if you feel you need them, do more. And print slower. I understand that we're all about speed once you get into it. But when you're first starting out, and even in general, I tend to still knock it down a few more. I know I can print at this speed. That's how fast your print head is moving, or how quickly you cure the resin, or how quickly you lift it, or whatever it is. We try to spend less time printing, more time producing things, right? However, you know what wastes more resin or more material, more plastic, more time? A failed print, especially one that you only discover at the very end. That wastes it completely. All that time wasted, all that resin wasted. It's much better to overload with supports and slow it down than it is to try and put it as fast as possible with as few supports as possible to get that print, because the failure will cost you dearly. And in fact, it can ruin a session you were doing if you were printing for a game or something like that, because it still takes a while. So slow it down, especially starting out. Once you understand your printer and your material, whichever version it is, you can understand exactly how fast you can go, right? How many fans you got on that print head in your FDM. All of that kind of goes into it. Just how hot it is, how humid it is in your environment can matter. So definitely just slow things down, at least at first. And trust me, you'll have a much better time printing. Now, this one got me good. Don't fall for this mistake. Have extra material on hand. Have an extra spool. Have an extra jug of resin. Have more than you need, because what will invariably happen is you use it all up, but you're not done with the print. And so it just either ruins it, or it delays it and you have to let it sit there while you go and get some more. And often these are things you're ordering in. It's like you just go run to the Walgreens and grab something, right? So you really have to kind of focus on having extra on hand for whenever you might need it. If it's a resin, often there's a little vat that it dips into, right? That vat cannot hold an entire print's volume, depending on what you're doing. If it's solid, if it's taking up that whole print volume, you won't have enough. You have to add resin to it just to finish the resin. Even if you top it off beforehand, you still might need more. So don't think I have a full thing of a full vat of resin, I'm good. Same with the spool. Estimates are only estimates, and of course snacks can happen, issues can happen, and if it's jacked up, or especially if it's wound badly at the very end, sometimes you'll get that. If they don't wind it good enough, you'll need to grab an extra one. So be sure to have those on hand and ready to use. Now, when it comes to whether or not you want resin, whether or not you want FDM, I'm not going to talk about print volume. You guys all, I think, know that the bigger the print volume, the more you can print, and of course the cost of doing different things and the brittleness and all that. What I will say is, when it comes to actually getting started, when it comes to being brand new to this hobby, that less moving parts is easier. It's just invariably how it is. So for instance, on an FDM printer, while FDM printers are very nice, often you won't get an auto leveling bed, and so you have to manually adjust the leveling there. And then of course there's the print head that's moving around too, so you have to adjust the belt feed there, and the belt feed there, and the belt feed there. And there's a lot of moving parts, so it can be very hard to get the settings just right. So you'll be able to print often, but it won't quite look as good as somebody else's. And oftentimes it's not just how fast it's extruding out or the temperature or anything like that. It's just your actual physical machine. Again, having a well-established company helps that, because you can find support for that. Resin printers typically move less and are therefore typically easier as long as you buy something pre-supported. It's typically just moving up and moving down, and that's about it. However, stuff like Elegoo has a ball joint that doesn't need to be leveled, right? Otherwise it's at an angle or something like that. And so getting something that doesn't have that can often be easier. For instance, Anycubic has a pre-leveled preset one that's just solid. So, just look at all the moving parts and realize that the more you see, the more difficult it is to fine tune that to perfection. But once you get it, you're typically good. You only have to set it once, and then you're golden for forever. Guys, that was at least the big things that stood out to me, having printed now for a couple years now, actually, is learning these little things that nobody had told me before. I had looked at, just what, resin versus not, print volume, stuff like that. But getting the established brands, that's huge, guys. I can't stress enough. Or the fact that not all resin's the same. If you find one smelly, try another brand, try another kind, try water washable. There's all sorts of different ones for you. Either way, I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions at all, I will be down in the comments below. And of course, I'm sure a ton of other helpful people will be as well. Feel free to ask questions or give me what your tips are. If nothing else, you're sharing with everybody else so they can learn from what you've learned so they don't have to make the same mistakes that we all did, right? So that's kind of the goal there. And of course, a big shout out to GameWorkCreate. They are linked down in the description below and pinned in the comments. Go check them out if you want anything printed, even if you just want an example of what's potentially there. Or again, if you're going outside your comfort zone, whether it comes to the material used, whether it comes to just how big of a print job it is, whether it's size or whether it's amount, like a whole table's worth of terrain, something like that, go ahead and check them out below. With that, take care, guys. Have a great rest of your day. Bye, guys.